my husband had 2 children with his secretary, and I said absolutely nothing. But during an ordinary medical checkup, the doctor looked at him and asked, "Hasn't your wife told you yet?" In an instant, his smile disappeared. The first time I saw my husband cradling his secretary's second baby, I smiled with such calmness that everyone assumed something inside me had died. It had not. I was counting. I counted the cameras first. 4 near the step, and repeat, 2 by the auction table, 1 roaming between donors. I counted the board members who looked away, the relatives who looked pleased, and the employees who suddenly discovered something fascinating at the bottom of their champagne glasses. Most of all, I counted the seconds between Martin lifting that child and the first whisper reaching my table. It took 9. Martin Voss cared more about applause than honesty. At the annual charity gala for Voss Meridian, he entered with Clara Hayes on his arm, a toddler gripping his jacket, and a newborn asleep against his chest. Cameras flashed, guests murmured. Then Martin raised the baby and said, loud enough for every donor to hear, "My legacy keeps growing." He had not warned me he would bring them. My name was printed beside his on the invitation. But my seat had been moved to the edge of the stage, while Clara occupied the chair beside him. She wore the emerald necklace I had given Martin's mother for her 70th birthday. When I asked about it, his mother said family jewelry should follow the future of the family. That was how cruelty operated in the Voss family. Never privately if a public version could make it feel official. I had helped build Voss Meridian from a struggling regional distributor into a national medical supply company. Martin was the founder's son and the public face. I was the attorney who renegotiated its debt, created its compliance program, and convinced 3 hospital networks not to cancel their contracts after a disastrous product recall. In photographs, Martin stood at the center. I was usually the woman cropped near his shoulder. When we married, I thought the imbalance was temporary. He told me visibility exhausted me and leadership energized him. I let him speak for both of us, because I was busy keeping the promises he made. By our 5th anniversary, the board assumed my title was ceremonial and Martin assumed my competence was marital property. Then Clara arrived. She was intelligent, ambitious, and very good at discovering which version of herself a powerful person wanted reflected back. Within 6 months, she controlled Martin's calendar. Within a year, she traveled on every business trip. When employees whispered, Martin accused them of resenting a talented young woman. I later learned how many people had noticed before I did. Assistants saw Clara leave his office after hours. Drivers saw itinerary changes. Finance staff questioned reimbursements and were told executive discretion covered the matter. A company can become complicit without a single meeting where anyone votes to protect a lie. All it takes is fear, ambition, and the quiet hope that someone else will be brave first. He accused me of something worse, jealousy without evidence. Across the ballroom, Clara turned toward me with a sweet little blade of a smile. I was his wife of 9 years. I was also the woman he had told everyone was too fragile to give him children. When people came over to comfort me, I thanked them. When his mother pressed my hand and murmured, "Endure quietly, Evelyn. A man needs hairs," I nodded. When Martin leaned close and whispered, "Don't embarrass me tonight," I looked at the 2 children and said, "I wouldn't dream of it." He mistook my silence for defeat. 5 years earlier, during a fertility consultation he had walked out on, Martin had refused to listen to the results. "Call my wife," he told the doctor. "She handles unpleasant details." So the doctor called me. Permanent infertility. Not poor chances, not stress, not something supplements could fix. A childhood surgery had left him unable to father a child. Dr. Ellison asked me to bring Martin back so he could explain the options and recommend confirmatory testing. I scheduled 3 appointments. Martin canceled all 3. The last time, he said obsessing over laboratory results was making me unattractive. I carried the diagnosis alone, while his mother brought herbal teas to our house and suggested my career had confused my body. Martin never corrected her. At family dinners, he let relatives discuss specialists I should see. Once, Clara placed a clinic brochure beside my plate and said modern medicine could do wonderful things if a woman was humble enough to ask. Every insult was wrapped in concern. That made it harder to object without sounding cruel. His mother would touch my hand before mentioning another specialist. An aunt would sigh before asking whether I had considered reducing my hours. Martin would stare into his wine glass as if the whole conversation were happening to a woman he barely knew. Silence can be a room. For years, he locked me inside it, and then told everyone I preferred the quiet. I went to the restroom and cried with the faucet running. The medical truth was his to disclose, and I would not weaponize it merely because he used my silence against me. That decision felt principled then. Later, I understood that privacy and secrecy are different. Privacy protects dignity. Secrecy can become shelter for abuse. I cried that day, not because of the diagnosis, but because Martin never answered any of my calls. By evening, he was drunk in a hotel bar with Clara, who was then his new assistant. 2 years later, Clara announced her first pregnancy. Martin came home glowing with victory and cruelty. "See," he said. "The problem was never me." I looked at his face, handsome and foolish with triumph, and understood something cold but useful. If I screamed the truth, it would mean nothing. He would call me jealous, Clara would call me barren, his family would call me desperate. So I became quiet. Quiet did not mean passive. I asked the board's independent counsel to clarify my fiduciary duties. I created a secure copy of corporate expense records and found Clara's apartment hidden beneath a vendor called Hayes Strategic Outreach. Martin approved monthly market research, payments that covered rent, furniture, childcare, and vacations. The first child was born 2 years after the affair began. Martin transferred company stock into a temporary trust without board approval. The second child's birth triggered another amendment. Both documents described the children as his biological heirs, a claim designed to bypass restrictions in the founder's estate plan. That transformed humiliation into fraud. I hired Naomi Chen, a forensic accountant who had once dismantled a hospital kickback scheme using cafeteria receipts. She followed the vendor payments to a shell company managed by Adrian, Martin's younger brother. Adrian had always presented himself as the harmless sibling, grateful for a minor executive role. In reality, he approved Clara's reimbursements whenever Martin's signature would attract attention. Naomi found hotel rooms booked for Clara and Adrian on dates. Martin was speaking at conferences in other cities. Security footage showed Adrian entering Clara's apartment late at night. Then came the photograph Adrian kissing her, one hand on the newborn's stroller. I remember staring at that photograph until the faces stopped looking human and became evidence. Clara's hand rested on Adrian's chest with an ease she never showed around Martin, unless a camera was near. Adrian wore the smug little smile of a man who thought invisibility was the same as safety. Behind them, the stroller canopy was half open. A child's blanket hung over the side, soft and blue and painfully innocent. I still did not know whether Adrian was the father. I only knew Martin's certainty had been engineered by people who understood his vanity. He wanted public proof that the fertility problem belonged to me. Clara gave him 2 children to display, and he never asked the question that might remove the applause. My attorney petitioned for a confidential paternity determination because the proposed trust transfer affected corporate shares. Clara agreed, believing the test would unlock the assets. She submitted Adrian's sample through a private arrangement and apparently assumed no one would compare the name on the chain of custody form. Naomi compared everything. By the time of Martin's required medical appointment, the report was in my attorney's safe. I did not arrange Dr. Ellison's question. Martin's own neglected chart did that. But when the truth finally entered the room, I was ready for what followed. I learned where the money was going. I copied invoices for client lodging that were actually Clara's apartment. I tracked luxury gifts disguised as marketing expenses. I saved emails where Martin promised company shares to our children. I called the attorney who had written our prenup. The attorney who happened to be me before marriage turned me into his favorite decoration. Then, one Monday morning, Martin brought me to his executive medical checkup because the board required spouses to attend the final consultation. He smiled as though the room belonged to him. The doctor opened his file, frowned, looked at Martin, and asked, "Hasn't your wife told you yet?" Martin's smile disappeared. The room went so still that I could hear the clock scraping against the wall. There are moments when the future does not arrive gradually. It drops. One sentence falls into the room, and every life standing there has to rearrange itself around the crater. I watched Martin search Dr. Ellison's face for a mistake, then Clara's face for rescue, then mine for guilt. He found none of what he needed. Martin laughed first. It sounded sharp, false, expensive. Told me what? Dr. Ellison adjusted his glasses. Mr. Voss, your fertility marker is unchanged. Your chart still shows non-obstructive azoospermia. Permanent. It was explained to your authorized contact 5 years ago. Martin turned toward me slowly. The color drained from his face until only rage remained. I folded my hands in my lap. You told him to call me. You said I handled unpleasant details. Clara, who had insisted on waiting outside the consultation room. As family. Pushed the door open just in time to hear the final sentence. Her perfume entered before she did. What is going on? Martin stood too quickly, sending his chair backward. Are you saying I can't have children? I'm saying, the doctor answered carefully, that based on your medical history and repeated testing, biological paternity is not medically plausible. Clara's mouth opened. No sound came out. For the first time since I had known her, she looked less like a mistress and more like a woman trying to calculate under fire. Martin grabbed my wrist. You knew. I looked down at his fingers until he let go of me. Less. And you said nothing. You preferred Clara's version. His anger followed us home like a storm. By midnight, he was pacing the marble foyer, yelling that I had humiliated him, that I had trapped him, that I had allowed him to love children who were not his. I almost pitied him. Almost. Then Clara arrived with both children, crying beautifully, and Martin pulled them close while glaring at me as though I had invented biology. They're mine in every way that matters, he said. Tomorrow you will sign the amended trust. Clara and the children get the lake house. 10% of my shares and protection from your spite. Clara lifted her chin. You've been cruel enough, Evelyn. Don't punish babies because you couldn't have any. That sentence made the last soft place inside me go silent. The children were standing near the foyer, too young to understand why the adults sounded sharp. I looked at them and felt no anger. They had been used as costumes in someone else's performance before they could speak. That was the line I refused to cross. Martin, Clara, Adrian, his mother, they could all be named by what they had chosen. The children could not. Their faces were not proof, punishment, or leverage. They were small people in pajamas, clutching stuffed animals while adults tried to turn biology, money, and shame into a battlefield around them. They will not be punished, I said. But I will not sign a fraudulent trust. Martin insisted biology no longer mattered. It was an extraordinary reversal from the man who had paraded them through a ballroom as proof that I was defective. I asked whether he planned to correct the public statements about me. He stared as if the question were vulgar. Clara began crying. Between sobs, she claimed Adrian had donated genetic material privately because she and Martin feared fertility treatments would leak to the press. Adrian, she said, was only helping his brother. The explanation might have survived if Martin knew about it. His face showed he did not. Then Adrian called Clara's phone. The screen lit on the table with a photograph attached to his contact, the two of them on a beach, his arm around her waist. Martin saw it. For once, I did not rescue him from an unpleasant detail. I went upstairs, opened the safe behind my winter coats, and took out a blue folder labeled House Sahaldri IPTS. Inside were bank transfers, hotel records, security photos, and a copy of the trust amendment Martin had not realized I had written years earlier. Any transfer of marital or company assets to an extramarital partner, any fraudulent hair claim, any misuse of corporate funds, each one triggered immediate forfeiture. But the cruelest clue was not inside the folder. It was in a photograph taken outside Clara's apartment, Martin's younger brother, Adrian, kissing Clara while holding the newborn. On the stroller handle hung a hospital bracelet with Adrian's last name still attached. Martin had not simply been betrayed. He had been chosen as the fool because his ego made him easy. The next morning, Martin called an emergency board meeting to stabilize the family narrative. That was the phrase he used. He wore his navy suit, the one he kept for acquisitions and funerals. Clara arrived dressed in white, carrying the baby like a passport. Adrian sat at the far end of the conference table, calm as polished stone. Before entering, I met the board's audit chair in a smaller room. Naomi presented a timeline connecting each trust amendment to a rise in shell company payments. Independent counsel explained that Martin had exposed the company to securities claims by promising restricted shares in exchange for silence about an undisclosed relationship. The most damaging document was not the paternity report. It was an email from Adrian to Clara. Once he moves the shares, we won't need him to believe anything else. And Naomi printed that email on plain white paper and slid it across the table, as if it were not the match to an entire warehouse of gasoline. I read it once, then I read it again. Martin had humiliated me because he believed the children proved him powerful. Adrian and Clara had humiliated him because they knew his vanity could be pointed like a loaded weapon. Everyone in the scheme had counted on someone else's shame to do the work. Their plan was larger than embarrassing Martin. They intended to use the children's trust as a vehicle, gain voting power, remove him during a manufactured health crisis, and control the company through guardianship provisions Clara had quietly added. Martin believed he was building a dynasty. He was signing away his own throne. I entered last. Martin did not look at me. Evelyn has suffered emotional strain, he announced. She may make accusations. Ignore them. We are moving forward with the trust amendment today. I placed my blue folder on the table. No, Martin. Today we correct the record. His eyes narrowed. Careful. I was careful for 3 years. I slid the first document toward the board chair, Martin's medical report signed, dated, and already delivered through counsel. Then came the expense reports. Then the apartment lease paid through a fake consulting vendor. Then the emails promising Clara's children trust shares as biological heirs. Clara stood up. This is harassment. No, I said. Harassment is telling a wife to smile while you parade another woman's children in front of her. This is evidence. Martin slammed his fist against the table. They are my children. Adrian finally moved. Only a blink. But it was enough. I turned the last page around. It was a court-admissible paternity report Clara had submitted herself 3 weeks earlier, believing it was necessary to activate the children's trust benefits. Father Adrian Voss. The room exploded into whispers. Martin stared at the paper. Adrian. His brother looked at Clara, then toward the door, already measuring escape routes. I tapped the folder. There is more. Adrian approved the vendor payments. Clara received them. Martin signed false reimbursement forms. The audit committee has copies. So does the district attorney's office. Clara's face fell apart. Evelyn, please. The children will not be harmed, I said. They are innocent. You are not. By noon, Martin had been removed as CEO for misconduct and misuse of corporate assets. Adrian was suspended, then arrested after the forensic audit uncovered $2 million rotted through Clara's shell company. Clara was fired, sued, and ordered to repay whatever she could. The board froze the fraudulent trust amendment before a single share could be transferred. The consequences unfolded over a year. Adrian pleaded guilty to conspiracy, wire fraud, and falsifying corporate records. Clara cooperated after prosecutors showed her the email in which Adrian planned to leave the country without her. She returned property, surrendered claims to the shares, and received a reduced sentence that allowed her to remain the children's primary caregiver under supervision. Her cooperation was not noble, but it was useful. She sat across from investigators with her hair pinned back and finally described the scheme without flirtation, tears, or helpless pauses. I watched part of one interview through a glass wall and felt no triumph, just a weary recognition that the truth had been available all along. It had simply become profitable for her to tell it. Cooperation revealed how the deception began. Adrian and Clara had been involved before she joined Voss Meridian. He placed her in Martin's office to obtain access to contracts and influence decisions. When Martin pursued her, they saw an opportunity larger than an affair. The first pregnancy was unplanned, but Martin's public joy gave them the structure of a scheme. Adrian agreed to remain hidden. Clara encouraged Martin to pay expenses through the company. Each false reimbursement created leverage. If Martin discovered paternity, exposing them would expose his own misconduct. The second pregnancy made Adrian impatient. He wanted shares placed beyond Martin's control. Clara used Martin's obsession with heirs to push the trust amendment. They did not anticipate a spouse they had spent years dismissing would understand every clause better than they did. I listened to Clara explain this during a settlement deposition. She apologized for calling me barren and said Martin taught her I had no feelings left to injure. "Did you believe him?" my attorney asked. Clara looked at me. I needed to. It was honest, but honesty arriving after discovery is not the same as courage. Martin was not charged with their conspiracy, but the misuse he knowingly committed was enough to end his career. Regulators barred him from serving as an officer of a public company. Donors removed his name from the gala program before the next annual event. The people who once laughed too loudly at his jokes began describing him as someone they barely knew. Our divorce settlement protected the company and separated my assets from his liabilities. Martin fought the morality clause in our prenuptial agreement until his attorney explained that gala photographs, expense reports, and his own public speech made denial impossible. The fertility diagnosis remained sealed except where medically and legally necessary. Reporters guessed after the paternity case surfaced, but I refused to confirm it. Martin had used reproductive health to humiliate me. I would not repeat the method simply because the facts now embarrassed him. That boundary confused people. Friends asked why I protected a man who never protected me. I was protecting the person I wanted to remain. Justice did not need every private wound displayed to be complete. Martin eventually issued a statement acknowledging the children were not biologically his and apologizing for false claims about my health. His publicist called it courageous. I called it a correction. The statement arrived years late and only after every useful lie had failed. Still, I read it twice because a public correction can matter, even when the motive is self-preservation. Somewhere, someone who had believed the ballroom version of me would have to adjust the story. I did not need their apology. I needed the record to stop repeating his cruelty as fact. He asked me once whether I had enjoyed watching him learn the children were not his. No, I said. I enjoyed nothing about being proven right. That is the difference between us. He chose to remain part of the children's lives for a while. I respected that choice. Whatever began in deception, they knew him as the man who held them when they cried. But love could not require company shares, public lies, or punishing their legal father. A family court created boundaries the adults had failed to create themselves. I funded an independent education trust from money recovered in the fraud case. Martin accused me of trying to look noble. I did it because the children would someday learn that their births had been discussed in courtrooms and board meetings. I wanted at least one document in their file created solely for their future. The trust attorney asked whether I wanted my name attached. I said no. The children did not need a plaque made from my pain. They needed tuition protected from adults who had already tried to spend their identities before they understood them. That decision brought me more peace than any headline about Martin's fall. It was the first thing in the entire case that felt built for tomorrow, instead of dragged out of yesterday. Martin came home that evening and found his keycards disabled and my divorce petition waiting on the dining table. "You ruined me," he whispered. I looked at the man who had once called me fragile and felt clean air enter my lungs. "No," I said. "I let you stand on every lie you chose." Then I removed the floor. 6 months later, I walked through the Voss Meridian lobby as interim chairwoman, my name on the glass where his used to be. The company survived. The employees kept their jobs. The children had a court-protected education fund, paid from recovered money, not stolen shares. I did not keep Martin's office. It was too large and designed for performance. I moved into a smaller room beside the compliance team and replaced the wall of awards with a whiteboard listing unresolved employee concerns. My first months as chair were not triumphant. Vendors worried the scandal would delay payments. Employees feared layoffs. Hospital clients wanted proof our controls could be trusted. I spent mornings in board meetings and evenings answering questions Martin once delegated. I also had to repair the private damage he left behind. Women who had watched me endure the gala approached me in hallways and confessed what they had seen but never said. Some apologized. Some defended their silence before I asked for an explanation. I understood both impulses, but I stopped comforting people through their guilt. My job was no longer to make every uncomfortable truth easier for everyone else to carry. We recovered enough money to avoid layoffs, but executive bonuses were canceled, including mine. The decision angered directors who believed leadership needed visible rewards. I told them the most visible reward would be a company that survived the people who treated it as inheritance. Naomi became chief audit officer. Her first review uncovered smaller abuses unrelated to Martin: travel upgrades, contracts awarded to friends, charitable tickets used for family entertainment. None matched Adrian's scheme, but corruption survives by teaching everyone that minor exceptions are normal. We ended the exceptions. At the next gala, the board asked me to speak. I stood at the same podium where Martin had lifted Clara's baby and called the child his legacy. For a moment, I could still feel the humiliation of that night. Then I looked at the employees whose pensions and jobs had survived the scandal. I did not mention Martin by name. I did not need to. His absence stood beside the podium more loudly than any accusation I could make. Instead, I spoke about stewardship, controls, and the kind of leadership that does not require humiliation to feel visible. The employees understood. Some of the donors did too. The applause that followed had no flashbulbs in it, and that made it feel cleaner. Clara did not attend. The children were living with her mother while she completed court requirements. I sent no invitation, but I arranged for the event photographer to avoid using their images in any retrospective display. They had been shown to the world without consent often enough. After my speech, Martin's mother approached me. She no longer wore the certainty that had made every insult sound like tradition. "I blamed you," she said. "It was easier than accepting something was wrong with my son. Infertility was not what was wrong with him," I replied. She closed her eyes. That was the heart of it. Martin's diagnosis had never diminished him. His cruelty, deception, and misuse of power did. Everyone around him confused the two until shame grew large enough to govern a company and two families. His mother apologized. I accepted the words, not an invitation back into the relationship. "Legacy is not what carries your name," I told them. "It is what remains safe after your name is removed." No cameras flashed at the perfect moment. The applause began slowly and became real. Later, Ellison sent a brief note apologizing for revealing the diagnosis so abruptly. I told him the disclosure had been Martin's responsibility 5 years earlier and mine never. The appointment did not create the truth. It only ended the arrangement that required every woman in Martin's life to carry it for him. I kept that note for a while. Not because I blamed the doctor, but because it marked the strange rote truth had taken to reach Martin. It had passed through laboratories, files, unanswered appointment reminders, my own closed mouth, Clara's lies, Adrian's schemes, and finally a routine consultation where no one was trying to be dramatic. Truth does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it clears its throat in a clinic and asks why no one mentioned the obvious. I returned to the clinic once, this time for my own checkup. The waiting room was unchanged. I remembered sitting there alone after Martin left, believing my marriage's future had narrowed to a diagnosis. My doctor asked whether I still wanted children. For years, the question had belonged to Martin, his mother Clara, and the public story they told about me. I finally answered for myself. The question did not hurt the way it once had. It opened space. I thought about adoption, mentorship, nieces and nephews, a life with no children and no apology attached. I thought about how easily womanhood had been reduced to a public scoreboard in my marriage. For once, the answer did not have to defend me. It only had to belong to me. "I don't know," I said. "But whatever I choose will not be evidence for anyone else." Uncertainty felt freer than certainty had ever felt inside my marriage. I later joined the board of a nonprofit, providing independent advocates during fertility treatment. Medical facts should not become weapons, carried by the person who stayed for the appointment. Couples deserved information together, and when one partner refused, the other deserved support rather than blame. The work did not erase what happened. It gave the pain a use that did not require me to keep living inside it. Martin lived in a rented condo across town. Clara sold designer bags online. Adrian waited for sentencing. And I slept peacefully, not because revenge had turned me cruel, because silence had finally become power. Peace was not dramatic. It was waking up without preparing a defense before my feet touched the floor. I had once stayed quiet to protect my husband's dignity. In the end, I spoke to protect everyone his dignity had been costing. That was the lesson I carried forward. Dignity that requires another person to be publicly diminished is not dignity at all. It is only reputation wearing nicer clothes. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share this video with them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.